Every human alive today who lives outside Africa can trace their ancestry back to a remarkably small group, perhaps just a few thousand people, who walked out of the continent roughly 70,000 years ago. You already knew that. It's one of the most repeated facts in science. But you've probably never once asked the obvious follow-up question: what happened to everybody else? Millions of humans watched that small group leave and chose to stay. Their descendants are still here, and the DNA they carry is rewriting everything we thought we understood about what it means to be human. Some of that DNA doesn't match any species we've ever found a skeleton for. The story of human migration has always been told as a story of departure. The brave few who crossed into the Arabian Peninsula, who spread to Europe, Asia, Australia. The out-of-Africa narrative is so dominant that the continent itself became a kind of prologue. Africa was the starting line. The real story supposedly began when people left. This framing has shaped decades of research funding, museum exhibitions, and the public imagination. In 2012, a team led by Karina Schlebusch at Uppsala University sequenced the genomes of Khoe-San individuals from southern Africa and found something that should have reoriented the entire field. The deepest split in the human family tree doesn't separate Africans from non-Africans. It separates Africans from each other. The Khoe-San lineage diverged from the ancestors of every other living person between 200,000 and 350,000 years ago. That predates the out-of-Africa migration by 250,000 years. The real story of human diversity didn't begin when some humans left. It was already ancient before anyone took a single step off the continent. But that deep split is only the first layer. If you could somehow gather every human on Earth into one room and read through their genetic code, the people from Africa would contain more diversity than the rest of the planet combined. Not slightly more, substantially more. Two individuals from different ethnic groups within Nigeria can be more genetically different from each other than a person from Finland is from a person from Japan. This is because the population that left Africa carried only a sliver of human genetic variation with them. Everyone outside the continent descended from that sliver. Meanwhile, inside Africa, populations continued diverging, mixing, separating again, adapting to radically different environments, from the humid Congo Basin to the Kalahari Desert to the Ethiopian highlands. For 300,000 years, Africa was running a parallel experiment in human evolution that the rest of the world never participated in, and we are only now beginning to read the results. But the most startling result came from a population that no longer exists. In 2020, Sriram Sankararaman, a computational biologist at UCLA, published a study in Science Advances that rattled geneticists. He and his colleague Arun Durvasula analyzed 405 genomes from West African populations, the Yoruba, the Mende, the Isan, the Gambian. Using statistical models that flag segments of DNA that don't match any known human lineage, they found something embedded in these genomes that shouldn't be there. Chunks of genetic material from an unknown species. Not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, something else entirely. They called it ghost DNA because there are no bones, no fossils, no skulls to attach it to. Whatever this species was, it diverged from the human family tree before Neanderthals even existed, somewhere between 360,000 years and 1 million years ago. And roughly 50,000 years ago, while a small group of humans was trekking into Eurasia and mating with Neanderthals, a different group of humans inside West Africa was mating with this unnamed thing. Modern West Africans carry between 2 and 19% of their genome from this ghost species. You have probably heard about humans mixing with Neanderthals. You've probably never heard that something stranger was happening simultaneously inside Africa, with a species we can't even name. But the ghost DNA wasn't just randomly drifting through these genomes. Sankararaman's team found that certain ghost-derived gene segments appear at unusually high frequencies across multiple West African populations. The gene NF1, a tumor suppressor, carries ghost ancestry in 83% of Yoruba individuals and 85% of Mende individuals. A gene called MTFR2, involved in mitochondrial respiration in the testes, carries ghost ancestry in about 70% of both groups. When a gene from an ancient interbreeding event persists at that frequency across thousands of generations, it almost certainly isn't an accident. Natural selection kept it. Whatever this ghost species contributed, some of it was useful enough that the human body refused to let it go. Think about that for a moment. Somewhere in the biological machinery of hundreds of millions of living people, there are genetic instructions written by a species that vanished so completely we don't even know what it looked like. And those instructions are still running. But ghost introgression was only one piece of a much larger puzzle that was emerging from the data. In 2023, a team led by Aaron Ragsdale and Simon Gravel published a landmark study in Nature that proposed something radical. They sequenced 44 new genomes from the Nama people of South Africa and combined them with existing data from the Mende in Sierra Leone, the Gamus of Ethiopia, and European populations. When they tested the standard models of human evolution against their data, every model failed. The single origin model, where one population expands and replaces everything else, failed. The archaic admixture model, where a separate species occasionally mates with humans, failed. What fit the data was something nobody had formally proposed before: a weakly structured stem. Instead of a single ancestral population that cleanly split into branches, the earliest humans existed as two or more loosely connected groups that exchanged genes periodically over hundreds of thousands of years. These groups weren't different species. They weren't isolated tribes. They were more like a slow-breathing network, separating during dry periods when deserts expanded, reconnecting during wet periods when corridors opened between regions. The study estimated that this structure stretches back over 1 million years, 1 million years of humans drifting apart and finding each other again, across a continent 3 times the size of Europe. This reframe changes the question entirely. You've been taught that humanity has a single origin point, a cradle, a Garden of Eden, whether literal or metaphorical, a place where the first real humans appeared and from which everything else follows. The weakly structured stem model says there was no single point. There was no cradle. There was a web. Humans didn't emerge in one place and spread. They emerged from the interaction itself. The gene flow between distant, semi-isolated populations wasn't a footnote to human evolution. It was the mechanism. What made us human wasn't a mutation in one skull in one valley. It was a conversation between groups spread across an entire continent, carried out in DNA over 1,000 centuries. And here is where it folds back onto you. The Khoe-San, who carry the oldest divergent lineage on Earth, also carry genetic signatures of adaptation in brain connectivity genes, specifically LPHN3 on chromosome 4, a gene that determines how neurons wire together in the cortex. This was flagged in Schlebusch's 2020 analysis as one of the strongest selection signals on the branch leading to all Homo sapiens. The adaptations that built the brain you're using right now, the one processing these words, may not have come from one population. They may have been assembled, piece by piece, from populations that periodically met across Africa over deep time. Your mind might be a collaboration between groups that no longer exist as separate entities. The Iwo Eleru skull, found in a Nigerian cave in 1965 and redated in 2011, belonged to a person who lived roughly 13,000 years ago. It has an elongated vault and a flattened forehead. It looks, by modern standards, archaic. Under the old model, this person was evidence of a surviving relic species. Under the weakly structured stem model, this person was simply the product of a different mix, a different conversation between ancient groups in a different corner of the continent. Not a living fossil, a cousin with a different recipe. 96% of all genomic studies have been conducted on populations of European descent, the continent where human diversity is deepest, where the oldest lineages survive, where ghost species hide in living DNA, has been treated as a footnote. We mapped the genetics of departure in extraordinary detail while barely glancing at the people who stayed. The groups who remained in Africa didn't miss the boat. They were the ocean. Every migration out of the continent was a tributary drawn from their depth, and what the tributaries carried was just a fraction of what remained. Somewhere tonight, a child is being born in Lagos or Windhoek or Addis Ababa, and threaded through the cells of that child's body is a record older than any written text, older than any monument, older than the idea of civilization itself. Instructions from species with no names. Memories of climates that shifted before the last ice age. The residue of meetings between groups separated by deserts for 10,000 years who found each other again and made something new. The story of the people who stayed is not a prologue. It is the longest chapter, still being written in every generation, in a language we are only now learning to read.